Good morning to you all. And here we are at the beginning of this prayer of Paul in Ephesians chapter 3 from verse 14. The prayer begins at verse 16. Now, my inner joker was tempted to begin this by saying I wanted to call it seeking but not finding. Because this morning at an early hour, 3:30, I thought I'd go and search for the comet. I tried before last Friday in the evening, late at night, and it wasn't there. And sure enough, it wasn't there this morning either. So I've been on some futile search. But we're not calling it seeking but not finding, but rather we should call it seeking but finding, because that's what Christianity is about. It's about seeking more of God and finding more. And that's what this prayer is about. Paul is urging his readers to pray this way as he prays for them, that they might find more and more of God in ways that seem impossible, the way he phrases them. We'll see that when we get through. It seems impossible to know God the way he describes, but he says, yes, reach out for this so that you may know him more and more. It's an amazing prayer. It's breathtaking in its aspiration for us, that we should not remain just content in the shallows, but rather strike out into the deepest water possible. So that prayer runs from verse 16 to verse 19, and there's a blessing afterwards, which is equally amazing, really, equally incredible. And this prayer is a bit like a staircase, I suppose, or a ladder. Each step takes you higher. Each step challenges you to reach out for more, discover more of God, and find more of him for yourself. You might think that's impossible at the moment, but he says, reach out nevertheless. And the four key words there are through this statement are knowledge and love and strengthen and fullness. Put them in the wrong order. I put them in the wrong order there for you. The first one's knowledge. So knowledge, love, strengthen, love, knowledge, fullness. So the first one is to be strengthened with power. Let me read the verse from chapter 6, verse 3, verse 16. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. So there's this great desire that God would strengthen us with power by his Spirit working in our hearts and with Christ dwelling in our hearts. I think those two phrases are essentially two sides of the same coin, really. When you become a Christian, God's Spirit enters your life. And at the same time, Jesus comes to dwell in your heart. They're the same thing, really. God himself taking up residence. And that's what the word is, actually, to take up full residence, not to stay temporarily, but to have permanent residence. And Paul's prayer is that you will be strengthened by these things, and that they will lead to the things that follow. But you'll be strengthened by the knowledge that his Spirit is at work in your heart to sanctify you, to lead you. And Christ dwells there inwardly with his presence and with his love, his grace, and his peace to guard your heart. And of course, there are many times when you're going to need that. News from China at the moment is that the Chinese authorities are cracking down on virtually everything. Hong Kong, we hear about the treatment of the Uyghurs and the Muslim community, and also the Christian community, which is much, much larger than either of those two other things. Don't forget that the persecution that is starting in China started because the communist authorities realized the Christian church is bigger in its membership than the Communist Party itself. But they're cracking down, and the believers are being forced to close churches, stop worship, and even in some cases, it seems, they're being told they should worship the authorities. Well, we can pray for them, that they will be strengthened with power in their inner being, and that Christ would dwell with them. But it's not an irrelevant prayer for us, even though we're not going through the same sort of thing. It's something that we will feel the need of throughout the whole of our Christian lives, because we're often conscious of how weak we are, how frail our faith is. Never mind growing in grace and growing to know the unknowable, as this prayer will put it. What about just getting through the year? We wonder if we're going to make it that far. Because it's evident, for instance, that People are weary with the lockdown and its effects upon our lives. People just want to be free from it and free from its restrictions. And Christians are no different. They're longing to get back to church in many cases, which is kind of ironic, slightly funny really, because you remember what it was like at the beginning when you realized you could come up to church in your slippers, your gym jams, and with a cup of coffee in your hand. Of course, not to church itself, but you just sit in front of your screen and watch it. That was great. But now people are weary of that. I'm so tired of Zoom church. Oh, I just long for singing with each other, praying, hugging, talking, listening to God's word together. All those things we want to do together, and we can't. We long for the end of that. And yet we're weary. And we sense that in church life. People are weary of this. And perseverance is needed. And Paul prays, doesn't he, here, that we may be strengthened with power in our inner being. To know the Spirit himself working in us to keep us and strengthen us. To know Christ in us, with us. Again, not just alongside us, but with us inwardly. That's a great prayer to make, and maybe you feel the need to pray it for yourself or people you know. But it's just the beginning of the prayer, because the prayer is aiming to take us ever onward and upward. And it'll help us to think about how we do that. And it's not a futile search. I'll let you know if I find the comet. Maybe I'll show you a picture. But actually, this is something that we can guarantee God will help us with. So let's go ever onward and upward. And I'll see you for part 2 of that tomorrow.